Wait, you said basic weapon? Define basic. The translator clicked and hissed in the silence of the laboratory chamber. The instructor's mandibles twitched in disapproval as the rest of the cadets, gathered from across the galaxy, shifted uncomfortably. They had all understood the assignment. A simple spear. A weighted club. A primitive slingshot at most. Nothing more. But the human, of course it was the human, stood there with a grin that made half the class instinctively take a step back. Cadet Rin of the Chelex clicked his claws against the metal desk, exchanging a quick glance with his seat mate, a soft-furred Orlean who whispered, "I told you they'd be trouble." No one had believed the rumors, not really. The humans were new to the academy, barely 2 cycles into integration with the Galactic Coalition. Supposedly dangerous, unpredictable, resourceful to the point of madness. But surely those were exaggerations. Every species had its quirks, after all. The Arax could digest stone dust. The Vraxians could excrete acid. The Elthari could see across 3 dimensions of color. And humans, well, no one was quite sure yet. Today's weapons lab was meant to test creativity under constraint. The cadets had been stripped of their usual technology, deposited into a fabrication bay filled with scraps of wood, stone, and rope substitutes. The instructions were clear, printed in 6 languages and broadcast through the universal translator. Construct a basic melee weapon. No advanced technology. Purpose: demonstrate problem-solving with limited resources. Simple. Straightforward. No loopholes. And yet, here stood Cadet James Carter, human, with that grin that suggested he had already found 10 loopholes and was considering inventing 11 more just to prove a point. The instructor, an old Voruan whose leathery wings drooped with the weight of too many years in service, cleared his throat. Basic weapon, cadet. That is the assignment. A club, perhaps. A knife. Something crude. Right, James said, scratching at his jaw as though the idea amused him. And you didn't specify how crude, did you? A ripple of unease passed through the class. From the corner, Rin muttered, "This will not end well." The human winked. The fabrication bay buzzed to life as the cadets began their work. The Orlean students fashioned stone blades with sharp edges, carefully binding them to sticks with fibrous cord. The Chelex preferred weight and impact, crafting hammers from chunks of metal welded to rods. The Elthari, elegant as always, carved long spears with delicate precision. Meanwhile, James ignored the piles of stone and wood entirely. His eyes scanned the ceiling, the power conduits, the storage compartments. Then, whistling some incomprehensible earth tune, he pried open a panel on the wall and began tugging at wires. The instructor squawked, "Cadet Carter! The assignment is to use provided materials." James looked back innocently. "You provided the room, didn't you? These are materials." Muffled laughter broke out among a few braver cadets, quickly silenced by the instructor's glare. Within minutes, the human had dismantled half the wall's insulation panels, pulling free coils of superconducting cable. He dragged over a metal beam meant for structural reinforcement, and began fashioning a crude frame. Sparks flew as he stripped circuits with his teeth, muttering, "Don't worry, I'll put it back later." "Later?" whispered the Orlean next to Rin. "He plans to survive this?" By the time most cadets had finished their neat, regulation-worthy spears and clubs, James was elbow-deep in something that looked more like an industrial accident than a weapon. He hummed louder, tightening makeshift coils around the frame, fashioning a magnetic rail assembly with a precision that no one expected from scraps and stolen wiring. The instructor rubbed his temples. "Human, what are you building?" "Assignment said basic weapon," James replied cheerfully. "This is basic. Back home, we call it a railgun." The room fell into stunned silence. A railgun. The term itself was whispered in the Academy's military halls, a relic of ancient warfare so violent that most species had abandoned it long before developing starships. To hurl a projectile at near-orbital velocity using electromagnetism, that was the weapon of species who had not yet learned restraint. Crude, yes. Primitive, even. But basic? That was a matter of terrifying perspective. Impossible, muttered the Elthery. You cannot build such a device with mere scraps. James grinned wider. O ye of little faith! The demonstration phase was supposed to be routine. Each cadet would present their weapon, explain its design choices, and strike the armored target dummy provided by the Academy. The first presentations went smoothly. The Cheleks demonstrated their hammer, denting the dummy's chest plate. The Orleans slashed with their stone blade, leaving a respectable cut. The Elthery's spear punched cleanly through a weak spot at the joint. Applause followed each attempt, polite and measured. Then it was the human's turn. James dragged his contraption to the firing line, wires trailing behind it like some Frankenstein's monster. The instructor's wings twitched nervously. Cadet Carter, are you certain this device is stable? Define stable, James said, slotting a chunk of scrap metal into the chamber. Rin ducked behind his desk. There was a hum. A crackle. A rising whine as the coils charged. The lights in the bay flickered, dimmed, then flared again as if the very building strained to contain the energy. Several cadets yelped and scrambled for cover. And then, boom! The projectile launched with a thunderous crack that echoed through the bay. The dummy shattered, not dented or pierced but utterly obliterated, fragments clattering across the floor as smoke curled from the blast. The recoil knocked James back a step, though he steadied himself with a laugh. The silence that followed was deafening. Slowly, the instructor shuffled forward, peering at the crater where the dummy once stood. His mandibles clicked. This is not a basic weapon. James crossed his arms. Sure it is. All it takes is some metal, a few wires, and a power source. Primitive, really. Anyone could do it. Anyone? Hissed the Elthery. That is a weapon of planetary siege. James shrugged. On Earth, we call it a Tuesday project. Words spread quickly through the Academy. By the next day, every cadet was whispering about the human railgun. Some called it cheating. Others called it genius. A few called it insanity. But no one could deny one thing: humanity had just redefined the meaning of basic. And as Rin sat in the mess hall, watching James sip coffee as though nothing unusual had happened, one thought gnawed at him with increasing unease. If this was the humans' idea of a basic assignment, what would they do when the stakes were real? The arena thundered with disbelief, a chaos of voices echoing off the vaulted metallic ceiling. The evaluators whispered in frantic tones while cadets from dozens of species craned necks, chittered, or flared their frills in agitation. No one had expected the human, a species barely admitted into the Galactic Cadet Corps, to take a simple build a basic weapon assignment and conjure up something that looked like a piece of experimental military hardware. But Kai just grinned, brushing ash and dust from his uniform as though nothing was wrong. Relax, he said, slapping the frame of his so-called project. It's perfectly safe unless you put your hand in front of it. Then it's less safe. The cadets of other species stepped back immediately. Their instincts screamed predator's toy. The lead instructor, a rigid insect named Captain Zervek, scraped his mandibles in disapproval. Human Cadet Kai of Earth. Explain how your construction fits within the guidelines of this exercise. The assignment stated, design a basic weapon using local materials and energy sources available to a soldier in the field. This, Zervek gestured at the railgun, its twin magnetic rails still humming faintly, is not basic. It is excessive. Kai leaned on the weapon as if he were giving a casual science fair presentation. Sir, respectfully, it's basic to me. A railgun is just controlled electromagnetism. All I needed was a conductive rail, a power source, and something ferromagnetic to fire. I mean, come on. It's practically child's play. A murmur of disbelief swept the rows of cadets. To them, child's play was a sharpened stick, or a plasma torch rigged with a crystal. To the human? Apparently artillery. Zervek clicked his mandibles again, staring down. And this device has already discharged? Kai's smile faltered slightly. Technically, yes. Just a test shot. Small one. half a capacitor's worth of charge. The scorched crater at the far end of the testing bay, where reinforced steel had warped and blackened, told the real story. That had been a small one. The other cadets buzzed with nervous energy. A reptilian recruit whispered, "That could level a shuttle." "No, worse," his avian neighbor muttered. "It could punch through a shuttle." Straight through. And yet the instructors didn't immediately confiscate the weapon. The Galactic Cadet Corps had a strange philosophy: innovation mattered. Results mattered more. Rules? They bent, depending on who was bold enough to test them. Kai could feel the shifting undercurrent in the room. At first, the other cadets had dismissed humans as underdeveloped primitives, slow learners tossed into the Corps as an experiment in inclusivity. But now their stares carried a cocktail of fear, respect, and envy. Then came the twist. "Cadets!" Zervek's mandibles clicked sharply, commanding silence. "In light of creative interpretations, we shall escalate the exercise. Effective immediately, team deployment trials begin. You will use your constructed weapons in squad scenarios. Defensive, offensive, and endurance simulations. If your creations fail, so do you. If they succeed," his voice grew colder, "your squad succeeds. Or burns with you." A dozen heads swiveled toward Kai. His stomach dropped. He hadn't built a squad weapon. He'd built a fortress buster. The first trial was defensive. The cadets were herded into a hexagonal chamber, high-ceilinged and padded with shock-absorbing material. A holographic sky flickered to life above them, and glowing drones shaped like attack beasts began to circle. "Defend your zone for 10 minutes. Zervek's voice droned overhead. "Teams may combine weapons or strategies as they see fit. Begin." Screeches erupted as the drones swooped. Alien cadets scrambled to raise barricades or activate shield generators. A squad of insectoids speared drones with plasma forks. A trio of avians tried aerial dives. Kai. He crouched by his railgun. The other members of his assigned squad, 2 stocky reptilians and a timid cephalopod, looked at him nervously. "You're not seriously," the cephalopod began. "Cover your ears," Kai said, already charging the capacitors. The power gauge climbed rapidly, humming like a hungry storm. One drone dived toward them, spewing plasma. The reptilians raised shields, but the heat warped their edges. Kai pulled the trigger. The railgun discharged with a sound like the world ripping apart. A slug of scavenged alloy screamed across the chamber, a blur faster than the eye could track. The drone exploded midair, showering sparks and fragments across the arena floor. The shockwave staggered every cadet within 20 meters. For a heartbeat, silence. Then chaos. Cadets dove out of the way as Kai's railgun turned the defense trial into a massacre. Each shot ripped drones apart like paper, shredding the simulation in seconds. Within 3 minutes, their squad zone was utterly clear. Other teams' zones, still swarming, suddenly diverted as the AI drones recalibrated. Now every surviving drone beelined for Kai. The cephalopod whimpered. "I think you made them angry." Kai grinned like a lunatic. "Good." The railgun thundered again, blasting another drone into fragments. His squad huddled close, both horrified and exhilarated. No one else's weapons could even compare. By the end of the 10 minutes, their zone was the only one not breached. The scoreboard lit up. Team 17, pass. All others, fail. Gasps, groans, curses. Cadets glared at Kai with something sharper than envy now. Resentment. He hadn't just passed, he'd humiliated them. And worse, he'd painted a target on humanity. The second trial arrived before anyone could cool off. Offense. This time, the cadets were released into a vast simulated cityscape, full of towering structures, flickering neon, and automated defense turrets. The objective: infiltrate a stronghold at the far end of the map and disable its core. Most teams prepared stealth routes, camouflage tech, or misdirection strategies. Kai, however, had one button. The reptilians in his squad argued frantically. "We can't just blow through the entire city." The turrets will lock onto us, the walls will collapse, we'll. Relax, Kai said, patting the railgun. I've got range. The moment the trial began, he aimed high. The slug ripped down a street like divine judgment, detonating a line of turrets in sequence. Entire facades collapsed in a chain reaction of dust and fire. The stronghold defense grid screamed alarms. Other cadets froze in disbelief as Team 17 advanced behind a walking apocalypse. The railgun cleared block after block. Where stealth failed, brute force thrived. Halfway through, though, the complication arrived. A squad of avians, furious at being overshadowed in the previous round, ambushed them. Diving from the artificial sky, they deployed energy nets, intending to disable Kai's weapon. "Target the human!" one shrieked. Kai ducked as plasma fire seared past. The reptilians bellowed, countercharging with their heavy claws. The cephalopod fumbled with a smoke device, spewing ink like haze into the street. "Buy me 10 seconds!" Kai shouted, slamming another makeshift slug into the chamber. The avians pressed harder, wings slicing through smoke, nets crackling. One managed to clip the railgun, sending sparks across its frame. Kai roared back. "Not today!" The weapon discharged point blank. The slug vaporized an entire building facade, shockwave tossing the avians midair. 2 crashed into the debris, simulations marking them as neutralized. The rest retreated, shrieking in outrage. When the dust cleared, Team 17 stood alone in the ruins, railguns smoking. Kai's squad stared at him in a daze. "You're insane," one reptilian muttered. "Maybe," Kai said. "But it works." By the time they reached the stronghold, the instructors had clearly grown uneasy. The simulation flickered. The core objective towered ahead, but as Kai prepared to fire, Zervek's voice cut in. "Enough. Simulation suspended. Cadet 17's interpretation of the assignment has destabilized the parameters. This is no longer training. It is war." Kai blinked. "Well, isn't that the point?" The silence in response was deafening. Because deep down, everyone knew he wasn't wrong. And that's when the real escalation began. Word spread beyond the trials. Senior officers came to watch. Engineers whispered in corners. Someone pulled Kai aside and asked, not whether he should have built a railgun, but whether he could build a bigger one. And Kai, being Kai, only grinned wider. The explosion was so loud it shook the entire training dome, rattling ceiling panels and sending a rain of dust down on the gathered cadets. For a long moment, nobody breathed. The acrid scent of ozone hung in the air, sharp and metallic, a smell most of the alien cadets had never encountered before. Their eyes, compound, multifaceted, slitted, or bulbous, turned toward the human standing at the center of the chaos. Eli had his hands on his knees, gasping from the adrenaline rush, sweat rolling down his temple. Behind him, the railgun, his so-called basic weapon, was still humming with the faint, ominous sound of capacitors bleeding off excess charge. Its barrel glowed a faint cherry red, steam rising from its sides. Across the room, embedded halfway into the reinforced target wall, was a melted crater where the assignment's standard steel dummy used to stand. The impact point smoked as the alien observers tried to process what had just happened. "By the ancients," whispered Vrak, his mandibles twitching nervously. "He just vaporized a grade 6 armor plate. With a training project." Another cadet, Till, fumbled to reattach his eye stalk after it had drooped loose from the shock. That was not a basic weapon. That was an orbital strike disguised as homework." The instructor, Commandant Relier, stood stock still, pupils constricted to pinpricks, his scaled hands clenching the datapad so tightly that its frame began to crack. He was trying to think of something to say, anything to reassert control. But the human had not only broken the rules of the assignment, he had shattered the boundaries of what was even considered possible. The silence ended abruptly when the dome's alarm systems began blaring. Red lights stuttered across the walls. A metallic voice announced in a flat monotone. "Unauthorized energy discharge detected. Systems compromised. Safety override initiated." The railgun, still humming, had destabilized the dome's electromagnetic shielding. Panels sparked overhead, and the faint hum of the Academy's artificial gravity momentarily wavered, making several cadets stumble. "Eli! Shut it down!" Relir barked. I thought it was already shutting down," Eli stammered, frantically reaching for the power conduit. But the feedback loop he had unintentionally triggered during the shot was still feeding current into the coils. The weapon was trying to vent the excess energy, but the Academy's safety protocols weren't designed to handle a weapon operating on that scale. The floor beneath them vibrated. The wall crater widened with a groan as residual arcs of lightning licked across the dome's surface. "We must evacuate," Vrak declared, already scuttling toward the exit with surprising speed for someone whose species was infamous for overanalyzing under pressure. "No!" Relir snapped. His authority surged back in the face of chaos. "If this dome goes critical, the entire northern compound will destabilize. We contain it here, or we all answer to the High Command." The cadets froze, caught between the survival instincts of their species and the crushing weight of military hierarchy. And then, in the center of it all, Eli looked down at his creation and realized something horrifying. The weapon wasn't done firing. Even as its coils cooled, the capacitors had begun recharging themselves from the dome's energy grid. Eli hadn't just built a railgun, he'd built one with a parasitic feedback system, designed to cannibalize nearby energy to sustain its fire. In other words, it was acting like a hungry machine, drawing in more power the longer it remained connected. So funny story," Eli said, raising a hand sheepishly as the red lights painted his face. "I think it's about to fire again." The aliens collectively screamed. The railgun whined, a pitch so high it made sensitive ears bleed. Sparks leapt across the floor as the dome's power conduits struggled to keep up with the drain. Eli's mind raced. This wasn't the time for panic, this was the time to fix his mistake. But the only way to stop the runaway charge would be to manually interrupt the magnetic cycle. And the only way to do that was to expose himself directly to the unstable core. "Human," Relir said, his voice cutting like steel. "You made this. Fix it. Or I will personally make sure your species is banned from this academy for eternity." The weight of every alien eye pressed down on him. Eli swallowed hard, then stepped forward, hands trembling as he reached for the humming power coils. His classmates watched in disbelief. To them, the idea of physically touching a weapon mid-critical failure was madness. No one in their right mind would expose themselves to raw plasma currents. No one, that is, except a human. Because where aliens saw absolute danger, humans often saw a challenge. Eli ripped open the panel, the heat blasting him like a furnace. His skin flushed red instantly, sweat dripping into his eyes. He shoved his arm inside, gripping the thickest of the cables with a makeshift insulator he'd ripped from his jacket. His muscles screamed from the electricity dancing just beneath the surface of the insulation, but he held on, forcing the capacitor lock open with a grunt. The railgun gave a deep, mournful whine. Then, suddenly, silence. The hum died. The red lights dimmed. The room, once charged with ozone and terror, fell still. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Then, slowly, Eli stepped back, his arms shaking uncontrollably, skin blistered in spots where the heat had burned through his improvised protection. He wiped his forehead, exhaled, and said, "Well, that could have gone better." The cadets erupted, not in applause, but in outrage. "You nearly killed us all!" Vrak hissed, mandibles clattering furiously. "That wasn't a weapon, that was a planet cracker," Till added. Several others piled on, their voices overlapping. Relir silenced them with a single, bone-chilling growl. "Enough." The room fell quiet. Relir strode forward, his clawed feet echoing against the floor. He loomed over Eli, his reptilian eyes narrow and unblinking. "Do you have any idea what you've done, human?" Eli opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Words failed him. He had wanted to impress, maybe even shock his instructors. But he hadn't anticipated nearly destabilizing an entire academy dome. Relir leaned closer, his breath hot and acrid. You have not only defied the assignment, you have redefined it. Every cadet here was asked to make a basic weapon. They brought spears, slings, at worst, crude firearms. You brought something that could render orbital defense shields irrelevant. The implication settled over the group like a shadow. Even the angry cadets now stood in stunned silence, their protests dying in their throats. They all understood the unspoken truth. If the Galactic High Command caught wind of what Eli had built, the entire balance of power in the galaxy could shift. And Eli, clumsy, sleep-deprived Eli, was the one who had made it. Suddenly, the dome doors slammed open. A squad of armored sentries stormed in, weapons raised, their visors glowing with scanning displays. Power surge detected. Report! Their leader barked. Relier stiffened. Training accident, he said curtly. The sentries' visors swept the room, lingering on the railgun still steaming at the center. One of them cocked his head. That does not look like an accident. Eli raised both hands, instinctively guilty. It was, extra credit? The sentries aimed their rifles at him instantly. Relier stepped between them. Stand down. This cadet is under my jurisdiction. I will report the incident myself. The tension hung thick. For a moment, Eli thought they were about to be dragged off in restraints. But at last, the squad leader gestured sharply. The soldiers lowered their weapons and filed out, though not without lingering glares. The doors closed. Silence returned. Relier turned back to Eli, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's shock, the commandant actually chuckled. It was a low, dangerous sound, like rocks grinding together. Human, Relier said, you may have just caused the greatest disaster this academy has ever faced. But I will not expel you. No. I will do worse. Eli blinked. Worse? Relier's grin revealed sharp teeth. I am assigning you to lead the weapons demonstration for the visiting High Command tomorrow. If you are going to endanger this institution, you will do it under their watchful eyes. And when they demand to know how this railgun came into existence, you will explain every detail yourself. The cadets gasped. Presenting to the High Command wasn't an honor, it was a crucible. If they approved, a cadet could ascend to legendary status. If they disapproved, careers, reputations, even species could be ruined. Eli's stomach dropped. Tomorrow? But I'm not ready. I just barely got a knot to blow up the dome. Relier's eyes gleamed. Then I suggest you learn fast, human. Because tomorrow, you will show the galaxy what you've done. The railgun, still steaming on the platform, loomed like a silent beast behind them. And as Eli stared at it, he realized something terrifying. He hadn't just built a weapon. He'd lit a fuse that could ignite the galaxy itself. The silence after the thunder of the railgun felt heavier than the blast itself. Fragments of molten alloy drifted like embers through the void, scattering into the Black Sea. The training station shook one last time from the reverberations, then stilled. For the first time in days, the silence wasn't filled with alarms, klaxons, or the shrieks of enemy hull cutters clawing against bulkheads. But it wasn't victory, not yet. The enemy fleet had recoiled after the railgun's first strike, but retreat didn't mean surrender. Out beyond sensor range, hundreds of ships lingered, regrouping, recalculating. And somewhere on the Academy station, fear still simmered in the cadets who had witnessed a human do the impossible, turn a basic weapons assignment into a superweapon. Victor stood alone by the viewport, staring at the debris field. His hands still trembled from the recoil, though the railgun had been mounted on stabilizers. Every nerve screamed exhaustion, but his mind wouldn't quiet. He hadn't meant for this. He hadn't meant for any of this. What began as a cheeky workaround on a school project had escalated into mass destruction. Behind him, Instructor Karetha's claws clicked against the floor as he approached. The alien's scaled face was unreadable. His voice, however, was calm. You realize, human Victor, that you have altered more than a battle. You have shifted a balance that has held for centuries. Victor exhaled and turned. You asked for a basic weapon. That wasn't basic enough? A faint ripple of irritation flicked across Karetha's frilled crest. You know what I mean. They will not forgive this. Nor will they forget. The door hissed open, and more cadets filtered in. Not just his peers, but commanders, dignitaries, and even a few hardened veterans dragged in from retirement to act as advisors during the siege. All eyes turned to him. Not with mockery anymore. Not even with skepticism. But with fear. He didn't like that. Then let them come, Victor said finally. They think we're prey animals, right? Fragile. Breakable. Too primitive to matter. Maybe it's about time they get reminded we've spent our entire history making things that shouldn't exist. We split the atom before we could leave our own atmosphere. We turned rocks into missiles. We built weapons that scared ourselves. You wanted me to stay in the box, but humans don't do boxes. The silence deepened. No one contradicted him. Not even Kareth. Then a deep vibration shuddered through the deck. Warning klaxons flared red across the walls. The fleet was returning. The tactical screen painted the truth in cold light. The enemy wasn't sending everything. They'd adapted. Instead of massing their fleet, they sent small, staggered waves, testing, probing, trying to bleed the railgun dry. A brute force counter wasn't coming. This was strategy. Victor saw it immediately. They're going to make us spend ourselves. Every shot drains capacitors. Every launch needs replacement rails. They'll force us to exhaust the weapon until we can't fire it again. Karetha's mandibles clicked. Correct. And what then, human? Will you build another god weapon in an hour? No, Victor said. Something better. He snapped his fingers toward the station schematics projected on the side display. The railgun was never about the weapon itself. It was about principle. Acceleration. Momentum. Kinetics. This whole station is one big piece of potential energy. Dock arms, cargo cranes, hull plating. If it moves, it can kill. A gasp rippled through the gathered officers. You propose turning the station into a weapon? One of them asked. Victor grinned tiredly. Why not? It's just another rail waiting to be built. The hours blurred. Sleep didn't come, food was forgotten, and sweat stung Victor's eyes as he led crews of cadets and veterans through frantic improvisation. They stripped dock arms to create launch gantries. They rigged cargo sleds with magnetic fields. They loaded the station's waste containers with scrap metal, ballast, anything with mass. Every piece of debris became ammunition. When the next wave of enemy ships crept close, expecting another precision railgun strike, they found themselves swarmed with a storm of improvised projectiles. 100 metal coffins screamed through space like meteor showers, punching through shields, shearing hulls, scattering formations. They'll never see us as prey again, muttered one cadet in awe. Victor didn't look away from the viewport. They shouldn't have in the first place. But the enemy wasn't finished. The fleet regrouped a second time, further out, and this time they sent something new, a massive dreadnought, bristling with shield projectors and armored like a moving fortress. It was larger than the academy station itself. The cadets whispered in terror. Even Karetha's crest flattened in unease. Victor only rubbed his jaw and muttered, "Of course they've got a boss fight." Kareth gave him a puzzled look. "Boss fight? Never mind. Question is, how do you take down a beast that size when all you've got left are junkyard slingshots?" The answer came, absurd and reckless, exactly the way most human solutions did. "You don't shoot it," Victor said. "You ram it." The plan was suicide, and everyone knew it. But the alternative was waiting to be annihilated. They stripped down the railgun one last time, removing the stabilizers and transferring the capacitors to the station's propulsion systems. The cadets evacuated into lifeboats and auxiliary craft, tethered safely behind. Only Victor and Kareth remained on the command deck as they angled the academy station toward the enemy dreadnought. "Humans," Kareth muttered. "You invent God's damned miracles, then you throw them away on insane charges." Victor smiled thinly. "That's because sometimes the insane plan is the only one that works." The station roared to life, engines screaming with stolen power. The dreadnought loomed larger and larger on the viewport, its weapons flaring in blinding bursts. Shields rattled, hull plates buckled, alarms screamed. But the momentum was too great now. "Brace," Victor whispered. The impact wasn't fire and fury like he expected. It was silence, deep, bone-shaking silence, as the station's mass drove like a spear into the dreadnought's flank. For one breathless moment, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the dreadnought tore open like paper, venting fire and air into the void. When the debris cleared, the Academy station was shattered, but alive. Emergency compartments sealed. Lifeboats redocked. The dreadnought was gone. The enemy fleet, leaderless, scattered into the dark. Days later, repair crews patched the wounded station. Cadets limped through corridors, carrying themselves with new pride. The galaxy would remember this battle, not as a siege, but as the day an assignment called for. "Basic weapon!" And a human answered with a railgun, then turned an entire station into a battering ram. Victor stood once more at the viewport, this time not alone. Kareth joined him, carrying 2 steaming cups of something approximating coffee. "You realize," Kareth said, handing him a cup, "they will make you a legend for this. The human who broke an empire's fleet with junk and madness." Victor sipped and shrugged. "Or a war criminal. Depends who's telling the story." The alien let out a low, rumbling chuckle. "Legends and criminals are often the same, human." Victor stared out at the stars, their cold light unblinking. "Then let the galaxy decide. I was just doing my homework." And somewhere deep in the station, cadets whispered the story already. How one human, given the simplest of assignments, had turned it into a weapon that bent the rules of war. The galaxy would never underestimate Earth again.